Hello and welcome to the Alberta Library Trustees Association webinar, Getting Ready for Fundraising. We have with us today two people who have a great deal of experience in fundraising who are happy to share that with you and give some pointers along the way. Richard, could you start by introducing yourself?
Hi there. My name is Richard Cook, and I have worked in fundraising for about 20 years now. I'm now retired. I was at MacEwan University for a period of time, and I also was the acting general director of Edmonton Opera, past chair of Edmonton Opera, on the board of Edmonton Opera, and now I am a board advisor, predominantly in the fundraising area for the opera company.
David?
Hi, everybody. My name is David Atkinson. I have been, for my entire career, involved in higher education and occupied a number of senior positions at different universities, all of which involve some element of fundraising. So I have been involved in many campaigns over many, many years.
And David, don't forget to mention you're also a library trustee.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. And I'm also, actually, it's my privilege to be the chair of the Strathcona County Library Board this year.
Thank you. So I think we'll just start off by recognizing that fundraising is an issue that a lot of library boards are trying to discuss. But where would you say is a good starting point for discussions about fundraising? Richard, maybe you can start and David can hop in.
Sure. I think most boards should start by trying to identify a project that they want to raise money for. So the purpose in fundraising is very important, because you're going to want to develop a message for your volunteers that they can take out into your community and use that as leveraging to bring in some funds. Now, in this case, we're not talking about raising money for general operating costs. That is something that most communities will not find compelling at all, because there is a perception that libraries are funded for their operating costs. What we're talking about are those specific projects where you maybe want to add something to your service, your equipment, something that's identifiable, first of all, and something that can be achieved within a specific time frame. So those are the two conversations that I would recommend boards have. Identify the project and identify a timeline. Then you can map out your strategy to raise the money.
David, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what Richard said is really the very first place you start with any kind of campaign, whether it be big or small. You have to have a purpose. If it is just a general campaign raising money for the library, the likelihood of its success is significantly diminished. The second thing I would say is that one should try, in defining a project, to define something that is value added, that contributes to what is already the operation of the library. Richard is absolutely right. There is a perception, of course, that libraries are funded by public money already. And so any initiative, any fundraising initiative should focus on what is special or particular that people can gravitate towards, and it should be something that is appealing to people, something that they can recognize that the library needs. The other dimension to all of this, though, is there has to be, again, just to repeat, a beginning and an ending to all of this, and a goal of money raised, of targets, so that there can be some measure of success, and people can pat themselves on the back and say, oh yeah, we've been successful here. And it's important to your volunteers to say, you know, we're trying to raise $500 or $5,000, but this is the goal, and this is what it's for.
Okay, so you've talked about the volunteers, David, but thinking back to libraries, do you think that this is the responsibility of the board, or is this something that the staff could manage?
Well, I mean, the problem with libraries, as I understand it, of course, is well, let me try that again. Certainly, there's a sense with campaigns of any sort and any size that the board provides a kind of leadership, and that even though they may have uh, sort of volunteered or to be on the board initially as an interest in the library, I think there is a sense that they have to provide leadership with respect to being the first people to step up with respect to a campaign. With respect to staff, unless you have a very specific and targeted group of people on your staff already who are going to lead this campaign, and you just want to kind of piggyback it onto someone else's responsibilities, I think they're, you know, it's really asking too much. Fundraising is a singular endeavor, and it requires a very particular kind of person to lead it. And then I would say, if that's the case, then you really need to look at another organization whose specific responsibility is fundraising. And in the case of the Strathcona County Library Board, or the Strathcona County Library, I would say it's the Friends' responsibility, although all of the criteria for good fundraising ought to apply to them as well.
Okay. So Richard, did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I think this is, and I completely agree with David's comments, but this is one of the areas of greatest difficulty. And I'm going to draw on my arts experience here. Frequently, you will have staff members who say, oh, well, fundraising is the responsibility of the board, therefore let them go to it, and we're just going to be passive in this process. You often have board members who are thinking, wow, I came onto this board, I didn't realize maybe initially that fundraising was going to be part of this. I'm not sure how comfortable I feel. My personal opinion is, to paraphrase David, fundraising is a singular process, but it has to be done by both groups. Both the board and the staff have to take ownership over the fundraising. Who does what within that mix will depend on the experiences of individuals. Staff must support the board in their fundraising efforts, and the board must encourage staff to be active participants and take ownership. Otherwise, it ends up people just finger pointing and saying, well, you were supposed to, that was your job to raise money, or that was your job to raise money. And again, with arts organizations, it's a little easy, a little too easy for some individuals to say, well, it's really up to that group to raise money. In fact, everybody has to be engaged, but not to the same level. And we can talk about that later when we talk about the role of volunteers and the role of management. But they're two distinct roles, but they must work together in concert, in my view.
I mean, one of the things you need to remember is that I suspect many people who volunteer to be on boards of libraries do not expect that they're going to be involved in the business of raising money. They are on the library board because they're interested in libraries, and so this comes as maybe a big surprise to them. So libraries, as they are reflecting on what they're looking for when they identify criteria for potential board members, I think it's important to put this amongst the list of criteria so that there are no surprises later on.
That's a good point, David.
Yeah, totally agree.
So you'd both talked about setting goals for your fundraising. I wonder if you could kind of go back and talk about those goals needing to be aligned with the library's directions, as opposed to, oh, look, there's some money we could apply for.
I mean, Richard, you go ahead. I'll wait. I can
Okay. I think it's really crucial that when you're setting up goals for fundraising or trying to identify a project, that you go back and have a look at your core strategic values or your core strategic plan, because this is where the alignment of the organization's future and its future strategies must align with the fundraising. If you are an organization that is headed in one direction and your fundraising is taking a right turn in or left turn in the other direction, it's very hard to pull those two together. So I often talk about alignment. Now, alignment doesn't mean parallel. Alignment just means you're both projects have to head in the same general direction. So I would advise boards to go back to your fundamental documents. Now, if you don't have robust fundamental documents, that's okay, because you can make that decision at a higher level and at a general level. So if to try and give a library example, and you guys know better than I do, but if you want to raise money to improve a collection of something in your library, if that's not a service that you've already decided that you want to take part in, then I wouldn't go there. If you want to buy furniture so people can use the library as a drop-in center, for example, that's okay if part of your plan is to turn the library into a drop-in center. But if that's something you haven't previously decided is a strategic direction, then you run the danger of having your campaign work at cross purposes to where you're headed as an organization. I don't know, David, you have more experience in this area than I do.
No, actually, I probably don't, but you know, there's no point in trying to raise money for something which is not, it's central and important to the library. To pick something which seems particularly catchy or appealing is probably not the right direction to go, because you have to, in many respects, justify. There has to be a rationale for the campaign. You have to be able to tell people why it is you want to raise money and why it's important for the library. So libraries go through these fairly comprehensive strategic plans. They are required to report to government every year. So go back to those plans. Richard's right. Go back to those plans, see what the priorities are for that year, and try to put something that is incorporated in one of those priorities.
That's good advice. When you're thinking about the fundraising method you're going to choose, can you talk a little bit about how you might match that to the community?
Well, you know, if in bigger major campaigns, you know, people don't launch on these campaigns without they first go out to the community to do some kind of an assessment of need. We don't expect libraries to do that. However, I think libraries have been very good at reaching out to their users and to seeing what it is that their users want of the library and what it is that the library does that is good, bad, or indifferent. And I think if libraries are not already doing that, then I think they should be, but I can't imagine they're not. But I think that's a place to begin, because it will give you a sense of what it is that the community wants. And then you can shape whatever it is your fundraising target and your fundraising purpose. You can shape it to some of that input. It's not exclusively, but I think it will help you.
Yeah, I think David's exactly right. I mean, one of the things I'm a big fan of leveraging in fundraising. And one of the ways a library board can get buy-in from a community is to look at their overall campaign and maybe identify one or two community organizations where they can go to for their first significant gift, and then leverage that with other donors. So to give you a concrete example, if I was with the library and our goal was to raise, let's say, $5,000 to provide a new service at the library, what I would do is, as my part of my background work, I would go out and I would find one or two corporations or individuals in the community that might be able to fund 10% of that. So $500. And maybe it's two gifts of 250 each, or two gifts of $500. I would then move into my public appeal and say, the people who have are supporting our campaign are this company. You know, the co-op is supporting our campaign to the tune of X number of dollars, and they will match whatever $10 or $20 that you're putting into the pot for the fundraising. So what that does is psychologically demonstrate to people in the community that the people who are important to them and the people that they do business with are behind this campaign. And I think that can really give your efforts a leg up. And it also gives those businesses an opportunity to feel connected to the community. There are many organizations and businesses in centers that do feel a civic value and a civic pride, and they struggle sometimes to find something that they can attach themselves to. So if you make your project appealing to those individuals, and it could also be an individual, it might not be a company, then I think you create that bond between community that would compel a Richard to come along and say, well, you know, I do business with these people every day, and they're putting money in. I think I could throw a few dollars in as well. So I think that's one way of making that connection.
David, did you have thoughts to add to that, or?
Well, you know, campaigns, big or small, gifts come in a variety of sizes, and they come from a variety of places, from individual donors as well as corporate donors or organizations in the community. And there's absolutely no question that if you cannot get two or three of those major and prominent organizations in the community to come to the table, then it's going to be you sort of lose that, as Richard said, you lose that leverage that, you know, people will say, well, look, you know, yeah, the co-op has contributed $500. I can contribute. I can contribute 20. The other thing about campaigns is that, you know, big or small, the majority of campaigns, if you have a handful of larger donors, it will get you a good way to your target, as opposed to, you know, a whole pile of valued but nonetheless modest donations.
So far you've talked a lot about donations as a way of fundraising, but many libraries go down the path of bake sales, book sales, various other kinds of events or so on. What do you think of those as an approach?
Oh boy. I go first on that? I don't know how David feels on this, but I think those types of special events can occur, but the purpose of those events should never be to bring in money, because often they barely break even or they're marginal at best. But if you want to have, let's say you're going to do a little concert, some local musicians are going to play. What I would recommend is you concentrate less on that event as fundraising. Your hope could be that the cost of the event might recover itself, but that's not always the case. But use the event as an opportunity to raise money and to announce gifts and to use the event as a marketing tool. So what might happen is you're halfway through the campaign, maybe you're seeing enthusiasm and interest wane a little bit. You could have a family race day for a couple of hours where people do three-legged races or whatever. But the purpose is not to cash in on the entry fee or the money you have for that. The purpose is to promote your gifts. So you hold the event, but throughout the event, you give people opportunities to contribute gifts. So I see a lot of special event fundraising where they actually forget to ask for money. So the purpose is not the event itself. The purpose is to any type of activity that can bring people together and any activity that gives you a platform to reiterate your goals and objectives, to talk about your unique sales advantage. In other words, why you're the best, the library is the best organization to undertake this, and to sell the public who are coming to the event on the notion of giving. An example, I went to a fundraising breakfast at a college here in Edmonton, and it was very, very clever because the guest speaker at this event was a young student who had benefited from the program, and she spoke in such a compelling way that most of the people who left that breakfast left with a gift, with a check on the table or something like that. They weren't selling anything, but they were using the event as that compelling communications instance. Bake sales, book sales, those types of things. If you're not factoring in the cost of your volunteers, their time is valuable. A lot of organizations try and run these and they say, oh, well, the staff's being paid anyway. But the staff could be doing other things. So if your staff are involved as, quote, volunteers, you need to cost out their time. And if that figure runs heavily into the negative, you really need to stay away from them. They're work intensive with relatively low return on investment. That's my personal view.
David, where do you stand on events and activities?
I have never been a big supporter of events for fundraising. Events can raise the profile of an organization. Events can be about making friends. Events can be about informing people that we're trying to raise this kind of money, and we would appreciate your support. But when you look at an event, particularly one that is run by volunteers, and the massive amount of effort that is required by everybody for this event to be a success, and then believe that somehow when you do all the calculations of what it cost you and how much you've made in ticket sales, you will discover very, very quickly that the chances are it's going to be a negative number. So those who think about events as in themselves something that will raise money, it just doesn't. I mean, you can raise money, but when you calculate in all of the effort that it takes, you can ask the question, couldn't that effort be directed in a more constructive way?
Okay. And I actually have a last question that I didn't prepare you for, and that's that most libraries are not able to give charitable receipts. So they have, I think, two choices. One is the Friends of the Library route that you mentioned, David, and the other is partnering with a community group that is able to issue receipts. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I think either works. You know, there are service organizations in your community, whether it be the Rotary or the Elks or the Lions, and these organizations are always looking for projects. And if a campaign were shaped in the right kind of way so that it met their criteria, then they could be very, very helpful in raising funds. The other is that there is this other organization called the Friends of the Library. And that comes with all kinds of benefits and hazards. Friends of the Library, they can issue, they can issue a receipt for income tax purposes.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really we need to be careful about is that the ambitions of the Friends of the Library, who really are there for no other reason than they like libraries, that their ambitions align to the library's ambitions, and very often they don't. And so they will, I'm sorry, but a progressive Tea Party is not going to raise a great deal of money for the library. So there needs to be a very close association between the library and the Friends, and I am on the board of the Friends, but I think, quite frankly, it needs to be more than that, because there needs to be a more active engagement between what they would like to do and what the library actually needs.
There actually, just as an aside, one of the future webinars will be entirely devoted to Friends of the Library, and talking about those things that you've mentioned. So Richard, what do you think about partnering for the receipt process?
It's referred to as third-party fundraising, and there are some organizations that will do it for you. Some are quite reluctant because they put their charitable receipt at risk every time they raise money for a third party. So that type of fundraising and issuing a charitable receipt comes with a whole bunch of rules and regulations, including auditing, that must be adhered to quite strictly. I'm going to take a little different route here, and I'm going to suggest that organizations not fixate overly on the charitable receipt. And the reason I say that is a charitable receipt, people get confused in the business. A charitable receipt is only of value to an individual. It's not of value to a corporation or a company. You will have companies who tell you, can we have a charitable receipt? What they're actually referring to is a business receipt, because a business is going to take the deduction on their taxes through their marketing budget. Some businesses have charitable groups attached to them, and those groups require a charitable receipt. But in a community fundraising environment, you're not likely to encounter that, and any larger businesses that are working with smaller communities will understand that issue. As far as an individual go, there will be a lot of people often say, well, do I get a charitable receipt for that? A lot of charities have minimum thresholds anyway. So some organizations say, unless the gift is over $20 or $50, we're not going to issue a charitable receipt. And it doesn't seem to negatively impact those gifts. So I wouldn't vex about it. I think you have to gauge whether or not the hassles that come with partnering or issuing that charitable receipt are worth the returns. And one of the things you can do if you don't issue a charitable receipt is you have a lot more freedom to gift people for their donation. And that gift can be very modest and very simple, low cost, never more than about 5% of the value of the gift. But for example, if I give the library $50, we talked about this previously, is maybe I could get a book plate. a little sticker that goes in the book that says this book was made possible through a gift from Richard Cook. You can do those up on your photocopier. I would not overly fixate on the charitable receipt. Charitable receipts are important when you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. But really, unless the gift is worth $5,000 or $10,000 to an individual, the receipt is somewhat inconsequential.
Okay, thank you. So just before we wrap this up, last thoughts you'd like to share, either of you?
Well, I maybe just a couple of things. I think fundraising in relation to libraries can be an important source of resources that can do some very, very good things for libraries, and they should certainly be pursued. The one observation I would make is that raising money is not easy. It's very often you get more no's than you get yeses. But that shouldn't deter you from trying. It's a difficult challenge. Most people don't like asking other people for money. It's just in our DNA. But when you realize that, the worst thing that can happen to you is that somebody can say no, or not now, or, maybe in a 6 months time, then it kind of works for you. Just sort of keep your mind on the goal, and everything will be okay.
I totally agree with what David has just said. Regardless of the size of the organization, asking for money, for some people, is really, really hard. And what I would encourage people to do is in a kind of collective way, come to the understanding among the volunteers that you're not asking for yourself. I'm not going out to somebody and saying, give me $50 for me. I'm saying, give $50 to make your community a better place. And sometimes it's not even give $50 to help the library. Sometimes it's $50 because we need to make our community, we need to improve our community, and we don't have the funds to do that. And we can improve the community by supporting this project. So it's reframing the nature of the ask that helps people through that. The other piece of advice I'd give people is to pick up the telephone. Pick up the telephone and phone the Edmonton Community Foundation or phone Edmonton Opera and ask to talk to the fund development officer if you have questions. I have never been engaged with a charity that had professional staff where the staff didn't want to give an hour of their time on the phone or whatever to offer some advice. So if you don't have professional or experienced people in your group, you can become experienced, and you can do that by talking to people. Margaret, they could phone you, for example, and you'd be able to put them in touch with somebody.
Yeah.
And having worked in fund development, and I have to disclose here that for a period of time, David was my boss, and I learned a lot from him. Thank you, David.
Well,
it's just one of those.
Maybe.
Oh no, I did. I learned a huge amount from him. I have never had a period in the offices where I've worked in where that call hasn't come in and people have said, "Oh wow, I feel quite honored that you'd ask, and I'm happy to give you advice." And that included when I worked in post-secondary education, other post-secondary institutions that might run a problem past you, mainly the ones in Calgary and out of your own fundraising area. But if you know of a library that's had a successful campaign, then phone them up and say, we noticed you did this, can you and a lot of times getting that input from outside of your community can be really, really helpful, and people are very willing to talk about it. And if they're not, go to the next number on your list.
So,
Maybe just one final
yeah.
comment. When I think of organizations in our community that are worthy of support, there are so many. There are so many needs out there. But when one thinks of, when I think of organizations, I think of hospitals and libraries. These are organizations that potentially touch everybody.
Mhm.
And as libraries, 500 years ago, libraries might have been repositories of books. But today they're far more than repositories of books. They contribute in profound ways to the quality of life in the community through the programming and the contributions that they make beyond circulating books and CDs. And so I think there is a natural affiliation to people, and therefore, it's wise to sort of try to take advantage of that and to keep it in mind.
Thank you. So just to kind of wrap this up, the things I heard you say were that it's really important to know why you're trying to raise the money, and that it's not about your regular operating expenses. It's about that value added activity. But you do need a goal so you can tell if you're being successful. Fundraising requires some skills, but you can develop them or you can reach out for help. And that when you're doing activities, it's important to look at the net income and consider the amount of effort, time, and resources that would have to go into, for example, an event. So thank you both very much. I hope this is helpful to library boards out there, and good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, David.